Welcome back to UK Bike Fit, and it's getting to that time of year where people are moving from one bike to another, summer bike to winter bike or an indoor bike, and we're getting asked a lot, how do I transfer my saddle position from one bike to another? So today we're going to talk you through how to do that, how to maintain the same pedal stroke on one bike to the other, and to make sure that you are still comfortable when riding indoors and through winter. So firstly, what are you trying to achieve when transferring one saddle position to another, and what aspects of saddle position are we trying to keep the same? Well, there's two things. One is obviously saddle height, and one is setback, and both of those things need to be relative to a fixed point on the bike, and for this we're going to use the bottom bracket. So why do we use the bottom bracket as the fixed point? Well, our saddle position is going to dictate our pedal stroke, and if we have the same saddle position over the bottom bracket on two bikes, with other things remaining the same, which we'll talk about, we're going to have the same pedal stroke. And that's really important when we're training through the winter, so that we aren't using massively different muscle groups from on one bike or another. So we're training the same muscle groups in the same way, so that when you come to going back onto your other bike, everything still feels the same in the way that you pedal. So the three main variables on the bike that we want to keep the same, and that we're going to assume are the same for the purposes of this video, are your pedal and cleat system, your crank length, and your saddle, the saddle itself. We are going to give you some tips if you are using a different saddle on one bike or another as to how to get your saddle position the same with two different saddles, but it's much easier and much better for you if you're using the same saddle on every bike. So the reason it's important that your pedals and crank length are the same is that every pedal and cleat system has a slightly different stack height, which might affect your saddle height. And same for the crank length. At the bottom of the pedal stroke, the crank length is going to affect the saddle height. And I would say crank length is really important to keep the same across all bikes anyway, because of how much it affects your pedal stroke and which muscles are being used in which ways. So that's a good thing to do anyway, but it certainly makes transferring saddle position a lot easier. So the first step obviously is to measure our current bike accurately, so we've got some measurements that we can transfer onto the second bike. So step one is to measure the saddle height, and here's how to do it. So to make sure that measurements are transferable when I'm measuring bikes, I use this tool, which basically just makes sure that I measure in the same way every single time, just so it rules out human error, and it also allows other people to measure the same way that I've measured. So these tools are really handy. You can get these from our online shop at ukbikefit.com/shop if you're looking for them, and here's how to do it for saddle height. This little bit of the tool sits on top of the saddle, and you just push it back until it can't move anymore, and that actually measures the 80mm width point of the saddle. And then this part of the tool just has a little slot on the front to fit the end of your tape measure into, and this tool is a conical shape, so it's going to fit in our bottom bracket hole so that it centers our tape measure when we're measuring from the bottom bracket. So the measurement we're going to take is from the center of the bottom bracket to the top of the profile of the saddle, and this tool gives us a little marker as to where to measure to. But if you're not using this tool, you're just going to have to be really careful and make sure that you measure to the same point of the saddle both times when you're transferring the measurement later. So I'm just going to put one end of our tape measure into the center of the bottom bracket, and then I'm going to come up and measure to that point that I was talking about earlier, and that is 789. So now we've got our saddle height, now we need to measure the saddle setback. And again, we're using the same saddle that we're going to use on the second bike, so we're going to measure from the nose of the saddle. And the point at which we're going to measure to is a vertical line through the bottom bracket. Now at home, you'd use a plumb bob or something heavy tied to a piece of string, just to hold it and let it dangle down through the center of the bottom bracket. But in the Bike Fit studio, we've got a laser level, so we're going to use that. So very simply, we're going to measure from the tip of the saddle. And if I was using a plumb bob, I'd just look at where that piece of string intersects that tape measure. But like I say, we've got a laser level, so we'll just see where the mark is on there, and that is our saddle setback measurement. So now we've got our measurements, we're going to transfer them over to our second bike. And again, on this bike, we have got the same saddle that we had on the first bike. If you've not got the same saddle, we are going to show you what to do in a minute, so keep watching. But for this one, we've got the same saddle, so we're going to use the same points that we used before to measure our saddle height and saddle setback. The one thing to remember is that one of those things affects the other. So if you increase your saddle height, you're moving your saddle back. And if you decrease your saddle height, you're moving your saddle forward. So as we go through tweaking these measurements, we might just need to go from one to the other and back again just to make sure we get it perfect. But I always start with getting the saddle height right first. So I've turned this bike around because on most Shimano cranks, there is only a hole in the crank at the bottom bracket on the non-drive side. So we're going to measure from that point. And again, we're going to put our tool in the hole to center our tape measure and then measure up to that fixed point. So I've just adjusted the saddle height, so now we've got exactly where we ended up on the first bike, which is 789. And now let's see where our saddle setback sits at that saddle height. So we're at 97 millimeters now, and we need to be at 88. So I'm just going to bring the saddle forward a little bit, and then we'll go back and recheck our saddle height, because as we move that saddle forward, we're actually lowering our saddle height. So we'll need to tweak the saddle height again after we've changed the setback. So we've brought the saddle forward so that we've got a setback of 88 millimeters between the tip of the saddle and that vertical line through the bottom bracket. So now I'm going to recheck that saddle height, knowing that we'll probably have to inch it up a little bit more. So I'm just going to recheck the saddle height in the same way, center the tape measure in at the bottom bracket, and then up to here. And now we're at 787. So we just need to go up a couple of millimeters and then we'll be there. So that's how to transfer your saddle position if you're using the same saddle on both bikes. Depending on how much you end up moving that saddle setback, it might take a little bit of back and forth just to edge up and then adjust the saddle setback, then adjust the saddle height again, but eventually you'll get it bang on. So if you are using a saddle that is different on one bike to another, then instead of measuring your saddle setback from the tip of the saddle to our vertical line through the bottom bracket, use this tool again to measure from the 80 mil point of the saddle to the vertical line of the bottom bracket. And if you replicate that on both saddles, then that 80 millimeter point is going to be at the same setback on both bikes. And that is as close as you can possibly get to replicating your saddle position when you've got different saddles. From a fit and comfort point of view, if you've got a saddle that works for you, I would highly recommend getting the same saddle on multiple bikes so that everything in terms of your biomechanics and your body feels the same. But if you don't want to do that, or you just have a different saddle, you can just use this method instead. Hopefully that's been helpful, and if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It massively helps out the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll see us in the next one.